paints. And last night I painted one of these Dungeons and Dragons. That's going to be a bit too small to see, but a Dungeons and Dragons model, a Dwarven Paladin using this technique, which I will zoom in onto that in a minute, using just these paints. But I did put some silver and gold on here, normal traditional paints, before I put the contrast over them. However, in this video I'm going to do some spiders, some face spiders, which I've got here before me. I will zoom in shortly. They're the same brand, and I'll show you what those are actually by switching over. Oh, don't want you to see my stream. That's no good. There we go. Dungeons and Dragons face spider. So it's primed, painted, and ready to paint out of the box, essentially. They're not bad price. I mean, these ones, they're quite large, but they go for around about the sort of $6–7 level. And my intention is to use these contrast paints to just simply, and here's what the sort of colours normally are, sort of a blue and white on this Critical Role page. I also did a Google search here, and you can see there it is rearing up without the stone underneath, but they come with this stone on. That's the actual model. And again, people tend to go for the white limbs with the blue, the white underbelly and the blue back. So I thought, given these come pre-primed like this, I should be able to go straight on with these contrast paints. No priming, no mess. I'm not even going to try and clean these up. I'm just going to go straight on. So these could potentially be the ideal candidate if you're a Dungeons & Dragons person, you want to fill a dungeon, or you just want some dungeon fantasy fodder for any kind of game. These models from the D&D range are looking better and better. They call them HD, high definition, 1080p, but no, they're quite sharp. I don't think they'll need cleanup, and we'll get stuck in. So here I am back again. I'm going to now zoom into these guys so that you can see them. You can sort of see the size that they are. They're a kind of a palm sized. I've got them on, what that's a 40mm base, or is that a 50mm base? It's 50. That's a 50mm round base I'm using them on, with a round lipped. They come with their own bases, which are flat bases, but I prefer round lipped, which I've done here. So I shall zoom down so you can see them in action. So here's the model, one I prepared earlier using the contrast paints yesterday, and if I zoom in, since painting it I have dull coated it, and this is the dull coat I used, Tester's Spray Lacquer. You can get it in the UK, you can get it anywhere in the world. It causes cancer, but you know, you only live once, so you need a good dull coat, don't you? Extremely flammable, harmful, very harmful. Read back. I think there was an issue once with these. They didn't want to sort of sell them in the UK because there is some sort of cancer-giving element to them. But anyway, I'm probably making that up. Don't believe a word you hear on the internet, especially from me. It's a fantastic dull coat. I've used it for years, and it went on here quite nicely. So this was one of these plastic rubbery models, as you can see. They're slightly bendy. And this was a Paladin dwarf, and you can see the red's gone on there quite nicely. It actually had a totally clear, when I say clear I mean it was a crystal clear bendy blade on there, so it was transparent, and I put a wash on there. There was no primer on there, obviously it was a transparent blade. I put a wash on, and it sort of picked out some detail on that blade, leaving it slightly transparent. If you can't really see through it, but it is a transparent blade. And I just put a metallic on the main armour and washed onto that with the I think I used this Basilicum grey to do the armour plating on there, and also obviously did some washing on here too using the contrast colours. So quite happy that, you know, this isn't my normal. I normally do a slightly better standard than this, but this is a tabletop. I haven't done the eyes on there actually. But I think for most people, if you can do that fast, it's a great use of these paints, really, if you just want a tabletop standard that you're going to get a model into play, and that's the main thing you want to do with these. So I have 4 of these face spiders, and as I say, I've titled this video, it's a live stream, sort of speed painting these. And I realise now I'm quite daunted by the amount of body and abdomen that I've got to cover on these spiders to get them all done. Well, I'm just going to look at my reference again, which I've got up on the screen over here, to make sure I've got a similar colour scheme going on. Let's see, there was a face spider model I did a search on. Try and find a good reference again. Now that seems like a reasonable one because I can see the underbelly. Oh, this is a 3D print. Let me switch to that and show you. So there you go, that's interesting. It has a very white underbelly, blue from the end of these pieces here, a blue head and obviously a blue back with these dots in blue along the back as well. So that's not too bad a reference to go from. I'm going to keep that up on my screen, and then I'm just going to splash these on. So I'm now going to pick the colours because I haven't done any prep. I'm just going to dive in and see which colour I'm going to use. So switching back. So what have I got here? Well, this looks a bit pale, amethyst blue. I might zoom out a little bit so you can see these a bit more easily. So that's the grey, dark grey. Now I'll go on to that last. Now this is where I shall give you a little bit of a paint theory engine, as in when you're putting these contrasts on, you want to use your lightest tone first. You don't want to go on with, let's say for example, I thought I might do some final edge details somewhere using the black or this basilicum grey, balsamic vinegar grey, and if I splash some of that on now, that will show through all of the lighter contrast shades that you put on. So it's not wise to go on first with your darkest colour, whatever part of the model it's on, unless it was a completely separate part of the model, like you were doing armour plating or something like on this little Dwarven Paladin. But definitely go on with your lightest first and then build up. Now, because they're this kind of off-white grey, the first thing I'm probably going on with is this contrast apothecary white, just to make sure that there's some shading of some sort on all of the areas that I'm going to leave that white colour on, like the underbelly and the first section of the spiny legs. So thinking that through, I'm going to go on first with that contrast apothecary white, which is like a grey wash really. Then to get the blue that I'm watching, it's quite a bright blue. It is kind of looking like, I think this one's possibly too bright. If I switch back to that browser view again, if I can go in close to that model. I mean, this is not the only one I've seen, and this is a 3D printed. Let's have a look at this one. See, that's very basic, just sort of blue limbs in one strong tone. I wanted to try and get something slightly better than that. There's someone else's. This is a bit more like it, where they've done some slightly paler blobules on the back. You can see where they've done the blobbing on the white and the underbelly. So that's a reasonable bluish look, and I think that is ultramarines. I think that is probably close to this. So that's going to be my main darker blue. Also, something to note with these, there is like a carrier agent acrylic pigment or something in there. Not pigment, but actually something to do with the way that they are bonded together. And it does seem to have separated in a few. So I'm putting stainless steel balls. I have a... so normally with such a thin paint, I wouldn't bother putting an agitator in. But given that it seems to have just separated a little bit and need a shake, I don't know, that's because maybe they've had them in storage for a while. But it's worth giving it a go. So yeah, I can see I've shaken that half of that up. That ball's agitated that nicely. So that's going to be my primary blue for the dark back. So I do think a lighter blue on those nodules on the main part of the body, around the head there. So I might put some of that on. That's a lighter colour. And then really, I think that's going to be it. I think I might, near the end, as I mentioned, go on with the lighter colours first, but near the end, I might use some of this Pterodon turquoise or Griff Charger grey, which is like a bluish grey. And, that may well give me some nice darker areas, but like I said, the darker later, start with the lighter colours and build up towards using the dark in layers. It's no good going with a dark colour to start with because you will not cover it with these contrasts, so go light and then just be patient with it, I think is the theory. So I'm shaking this one up as well because I can see it's separated slightly there. So obviously these are brand new, and so they haven't been resting anywhere. In fact, they've been shipping around the world wherever they get manufactured, so you would have thought they would have not separated so readily, but give them a shake. 6 months' time, people might be throwing these in the bin because of the lack of the way that they separate from whatever carrier that's the pigment's in there. But anyway, I'm happy with them so far. I've only had them for a couple of days, so I'm just trying them out. So big brush, because I've got a lot of coverage here. In fact, I could even probably go bigger. I've got a 4. I could probably even go bigger than a 4. I've got a 6. I'm going to go with a 6, graduate 6, because even though this isn't, it's a flat brush, I'm going to use this contrast grey. Like I said, it's going to be that first coat that gives some shading to the whiter areas without darkening them too much. Actually, I should zoom in too, shouldn't I, so you can see what's going on. So you can see how that grey is already nicely going into areas on that abdomen. Apologies, just had a mic issue. There's going to be a slight noise off the mic. Banging now. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a racket on the mic. But there you go. So it's already beginning to go into the crevices, grooves and detailing, and leaving the whiter areas showing on the top. And if you've joined this now later and you're live and you haven't watched this from the beginning, these are Dungeons and Dragons phase spiders. They're in the D&D range of HD models. They're good value, I think, around the sort of $6, £6.50, $6, $7 range, and they come undercoated in this sort of white undercoat that's a kind of very slightly off-white. And my theory is I can speed paint them using the new Games Workshop contrast paints. Sorry, that was out of focus for a while. You can see how subtle that is, and comes back to my first tip there really. Don't go in with the dark shades first if you're going to build up and you want to make some subtlety with these paints, because they've got such strong pigments. Do go on first with the lighter, because you can go over the top of them once they're dry, and all you'll be doing is adding to the shade and improving it, rather than, if I'd gone on with any dark shade now, this just would not cover it at all, and it would look pretty grim. When I then try to go over, say, a dark black contrast paint with this grey, it just wouldn't work. So it's a case of go with the light shades first. Unless you're going for some sort of specific result, there might be a reason to do it, but I certainly think it's probably wise to go with that first. So that's, I think I could use an even bigger brush than this 6 to speed through these, but I'm really now going to rocket through these, so it's kind of going to be a bit like watching paint dry, but the quicker I can do this, the quicker I'll move on to stage 2, and also the first one will be neatly drying. Obviously I'm going all underneath there and everything as well, and I know some areas like the abdomen are going to be dark blue. So why am I painting it? Well, it's just a consistent way of doing a single coat on here that means it will blend when I get to that point and start to darken some of the shadows. Yeah, so I recently I was running a Strahd Vampire D&D campaign, and we had a brief interlude where one player left, and I only had 2 players for one night. So, you know, that happens, doesn't it? Sometimes you think, what are we going to do? Can we continue the main campaign? And in the end, I did a little miniature side quest, and we had the characters finding a sort of a hidden tower between one place in Strahd's realm and somewhere they were travelling to. And it was like a tower where at the top there was a portal. In fact, they found a blade that was slightly ripped off, I suppose, from the book The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman, that could sort of tear open a gateway between one realm and another. And it was the elemental realm that this knife was attuned to, and they found that people were going missing near this tower, and by climbing to the top of the tower, the last step up through the tower led in through to another elemental realm, where they then began to descend back in a new tower, but they were in their sort of elemental realm, and it was infested by phase spiders, with a kind of a queen phase spider at the bottom of the tower, which they fought, and it was a close call because I only had 2 players. Also, I used an opportunity to allow them to recover something that Strahd the Vampire had stolen, their Sunblade, a sort of holy sword that they were carrying with them in a previous encounter. And I thought, oh no, I'll give them an opportunity to go and get it back. So I allowed them, through a magic sort of portal, to travel into Ravenloft, Strahd's castle, in a kind of elemental, ethereal form, and using a special pair of gauntlets, pick up that blade from his tomb and then quickly hoof it back out of there. You know, it's one of those things, isn't it? You don't, occasionally you take things off players that they've, you know, spent a long time collecting, and you don't like to totally ruin, you know, give them something like an important blade that would help them finish a game, and then whip it away again with no opportunity to sort of recover it. So it was like well, like I said, I only had 2 players that night, so I made it a small adventure where they were able to reclaim the sword and also fight off some of these phase spiders. Of course, at the time, I didn't actually have any painted phase spiders, so I thought, when I saw these, I saw them at the Salute Wargames show this year, and they were kind of flying off the shelves. I bought a couple of packs at Salute, because they come in singles, like £6.50 each in the UK, these. And then I bought a couple more on eBay afterwards. But yeah, just recently they've released a series of like Wormling young dragons in this range, and the detail is incredible. And I say, because they're dragons, which means they're all kind of consistent, red, green, bronze, whatever colour they happen to be, I think they're going to be perfect candidates, because they come pre-primed to use these contrast paints on as well. So yeah, it's all happening. Let me just check the stream, see that it's still going okay on my dashboard. Yep, Facebook looks like I've got 4 people watching. Sorry if I can't see your comments. I can't see any coming through at the moment. But I did put thanks for the comment on there. Just testing my technology. I can press a button and put a thanks on there. Right, so you can see how fast I'm going. This is the Contrast Apothecary white, which is ideal for going on a model that you're going to make white, or like this one, it's mostly, well, it was obviously primed in this off-white colour, and I'm just making sure it's getting this on there as its first coat, so that before I go on with any of the darker shades, I go on with a light one first. If I said that enough times yet. Yes, this is about as fast speed painting as I can achieve, really. I could use a bigger brush. I could have dipped it in this stuff, I guess, as well. But you can see on the abdomen, I've mentioned in a previous video using these contrast paints that they're almost going on like a watercolour. I don't know if you ever see the way watercolour sort of spreads and you get that slightly mottled look. Of course, that's not a problem if you're doing an animal like this. It's looking okay. I think nearly everything's covered. And there's a tricky bit. So you can see the difference between, this is the primer, they come pre-primed, and you can see the primer on that rock it came on. Which is another nice feature for something that's relatively cheap model, given it's all pre-made, you're not having to put it together. And I say I've put it on this round lip base. The bases that they come with are actually a little bit bigger, but I wanted to keep it to this, is it 50mm? Just to be checking again. Yeah, it's a 50mm round lipped base. I like the idea of sticking with that. So that's 4 done, and I'm only 25 minutes into the video. All finished now. So, yes, that's 4 primed, already primed, but they've had this contrast apothecary grey put on, and the next level will be to go on with a pale blue, which I'm going to do on some of the nodules and some little bits around some of the belly spots and things, the abdomen. But then I'm going to come back on with the darker, will be the final. I'm going to use this ultramarines grey, and that's again, it's separated a bit there, so let's zoom out so you can see what's going on. So yeah, force phase spiders. Next step, so what do I do? Put the very bright blue on, I think. There's Thalasar blue on maybe these sort of, well, they're obviously, well, they could be eyes, couldn't they? I don't know what they're meant to be. I don't know the anatomy of a face spider, but I'm now thinking that they might be eyes rather than like egg sacs or something on its back, but it's got lots of small ones on there. Whatever they are, I'm going to do them in a lighter blue so that the rest of the abdomen and things can be that darker colour. And I'm just going to remember my reference again, so going back to the images I have of the face spider, I shall get a reference on this one which I liked. So yes, so you can see it has some spotting. They've gone for fully white legs. Now I've seen some people do it where the blue goes out to the kneecap. Let's have a look again. Yes, see, I quite like having the blue on the legs. I'm going to do that, so I'm going to do a variation on this where the white comes out to the kneecap and then the blue continues down there, but I may still do the spotting around the knee, but then go completely blue down to the sort of toe ends. Yeah, so that sounds like a plan. Right, so there's drying. How do I speed that up? Well, because I'm through the power of the internet, I'm live, so I'm going to speed it up with the use of this hairdryer. You can see some of it's already drying on the first backs of them. Don't want to go too heavy with the heat because they are rubber. So one benefit of using this kind of paint is that there's no need for a wet palette. I have my wet palette over there, and I'm just splashing these on. There's really no preparation. There's no thinning down the paint. Although you could thin them down and you could mix them with a medium. They're drying out nicely, yeah. Apologies for this section where you listen to a hairdryer for a moment. See, I can see from where I'm looking that there's some of the bits inside the between the abdomen and the legs there that haven't dried yet. But let's zoom in and see where we are with the status on them so far. So yes, if you've just joined, these have just been painted with a contrast Apoca 3 white, straight onto their base prime colour, because they come pre-primed, these Dungeons and Dragons face spiders. And you can see, interestingly, on the abdomens, it's not a completely consistent colour, and I say there was a kind of a mix of some of the medium in there. Looks like it needed to be shaken up a little bit more, maybe a lot more. But actually the result is that it's kind of given some of them a slightly dark, mottled, fleshy skin look. Others a bit smoother. Maybe I could have gone a bit heavier on some of them. But generally it's looking okay. And of course, as I said before, I'm going to go on with a darker blue on the abdomen. And this is probably the scariest area because these paints have left that mottled sort of effect. I may need to be careful not to get any brush strokes or anything coming through when I use that contrast blue on there. Now the only thing I'm thinking of here is, do I go on with this very bright blue, the Talisar blue, in areas before the dark marine? I think I will, because this marine colour will cover up any of this, and it may for a while look a bit too bright, and then the dark shade going over will hopefully bring it all back together again. So I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush, but still a big one because I'm speeding through here, and pop the lid on this. So yeah, that's bright stuff. So where am I going to put this? Well, I'm going to dot those eyes, maybe not all of them, but dot most of the eyes with some of this, and let it sort of spill over the edge. Now, because I'm going for the blue head with the Ultramarines blue, I don't mind too much if I get some overspill here, because that'll be covered up, or even a drop. That will be covered up when I get to put on the darker shade. There's a lot of funny dots around the side. Do I care to do them all? No, probably not. As long as I get the majority of them hit with this lighter shade. I will zoom in now, because I just noticed I've come out. So there you go. Now, looking back at the reference that I had, I want to show that again. Luckily my stream key is not visible, so here it is. So will I use some of this for the dotting? I think I will, but I don't think this brush is suitable for the small dots. I think I'm going to use a smaller brush for this, actually. Switching back. Yeah, so I'm now using a Tamiya Model Pro brush, size 0. And yeah, I'm going to sort of spot around the knees and below the knees. I'm not going in too heavy with this, or being too careful. If I put too big a blob on, that's fine. But what's going to happen here is that there's going to be a complete blue on the spiny ends. So this is kind of like a gradation going towards that complete blue that's going to be around the bottom of these areas when they're done. Doesn't look too much at the moment, but it should come together once the darker blue is on there. quite pleased with the way the Apothecary Grey has gone into the darker areas. So I may also put some around these bits closer to the legs as well, to the main abdomen and head. Just to continue the sort of spotting theme. So this is where my progress slows, so I must speed up, keep it quick, because this is tabletop fast painting standard. To keep reminding myself, don't slow up. Put big blobs on, see how it goes. Yes, I'm loading up the brush heavily. I'm not taking too much care. I don't mind that there's any overspill around these areas for the eyes, or whatever they are, elemental phase eyes, because the darker blue is going to go around the base of them and hide, and it will obscure any, the ultramarines blue will obscure any issues that I've created by being a bit too overzealous with the way I've splashed the paint on the eyeballs. So just the lighter colour will then remain on the top of them. Splat, splat, splat. Of course, if I was doing one of these, I'd be able to speed things up for you, but I thought, why not? I want to get these done. They've been sat here on the shelf since Salute in April, when I first saw them and wanted a set for my Dungeons & Dragons games. And then I thought, well, I'll grab them. I used to have, I mean, spiders one of those things. Obviously, Games Workshop did the goblins with spiders, spider riders. And those were quite nice spiders, the sort of fat-bellied ones. Then those were the metal ones they did a while ago. Then they did them again in plastics, the spider riders. And those look pretty sharp with much more finer legs and detail on them than the metal old goblin spider riders were. But they were never really easily accessible, good spiders that look like this, you know, sizable, properly creepy crawly, properly slightly scary. And I think they've really hit the mark with these ones, because so I did have a lot of, and I still have them, a lot of the D&D rubbery pre-painted models that came out, you know, 18 years ago or so. And the spiders in there that I had were rubbish. I mean, they did the job, but they just looked like little round balls with spindly little legs, rubbery legs hanging off them. And these are certainly a massive improvement over that. I wonder actually if they're going to do any more spiders like this, but obviously different looking. Giant spiders, maybe there is one out there. The problem with giant spiders, which I found, again, just to comment on that generally, miniature modelers or crafters, they tend to make them look like tarantulas. You sort of look at it and you think, that just looks like a life-size tarantula rather than a dynamic fantasy beast, which is a shame. I know I used to have a really old metal one. I don't know who it's by. Maybe it was Grenadier Miniatures, but it was it just looked like a large tarantula. It may have been a Games Workshop one. Yes, I'm going on here with the Talisar blue. The view is that I'm going to do this sort of spotting around the leg, but the spines and towards the sort of claw pincers are going to get the Ultramarines blue treatment. So this is just a sort of to grade that going into the darker colour when it goes on the bottom of the claws. I'll say these are speed painted, so They come pre-primed as miniatures. This is just doing it quick so you can get them in the table. I mean, I'm cheating a bit. You can't, I mean, there's no way you could do a bunch of models that are, you know, with armor and flesh and faces and eyes. You can speed paint obviously fast, but you just couldn't touch on the kind of speed that you can do with a beast, because it's all one set of colours. You barely need to be concerned for things like a sword or something that might need different colours. I might do the areas of the abdomen with some different colouring other than blue, but say these generally face spiders are drawn blue. Yeah, so they kind of exist in the ethereal realm and can pop in, grab their prey, and then head back out to the ethereal with their grabbed prey and stick them in a web to eat later. That's 3 done. So really that's the most, well, I'm saying that's the most detail, but I'm going to actually have some more detail to do as I go. I'll start with those eyes again. And I've got that scary bit coming up where I've got to do the whole abdomen in the blue, in the ultramarines blue, and the question I've got there is, will these contrast paints work on a large area like that abdomen there? But we'll see. They've definitely worked with the apothecary grey that's gone on over the entire model already, which has left this already a very light shade on the white areas, which looks good to me. I'm just going to check if there are any other comments coming in while I'm live, because the concern is that this chat stream isn't appearing. No, there's no one else commenting. So no worries there. Back to the action then. So yeah, like I was saying, the D&D models have suddenly begun to look really rather good. Even the figures don't look as odd as they used to sometimes look, a bit misshapen. You know, whatever the materials they were using were not ideally suited for the paint job. Just going to shake up that pot again, so give me some more in the lid. So not all of them suffer that weird separation that's going on and settling of whatever the material is that's settling in there. Unlike the Ultramarines one, you can see it's got that white stuff that's settled. I've put an agitator ball in there to give it a shake. But that could spell bad news for these. You know, if someone leaves them at home on a shelf and then goes back to them after a few months and finds that they've completely separated, given these are only 2 days old, that's quite a lot of separation for 2-day-old paint. Well, I'll say 2 days old, it's probably manufactured in China about 4 months ago, and it was just so happened that it's finally come out on their release schedule now, so they may well have been in storage for a while as paints go. I keep drifting off the side there, sorry. Probably in some vast depot in China where they use the where they use the glands of pandas to extract these paints. I don't know if I'm slowing up or speeding up. I think I'm speeding up because I think my eye's cutting in now, so yeah, I wonder if a darker shade on its pincers could work towards the end. I've heard my front door go. Luckily my son's in, and I think it's a delivery. They're not there. I'm going to have to get the door. Be 1 second, live streaming for you. Let me get that in focus first. That's it, Amazon delivery done. Sorry about that brief interlude. So there they are. They're all drying off, and I'm going to hit them again with the hairdryer to bring them completely dry. So that's now been 50 minutes. Well, 47 minutes. But if you count my running to the front door and various other slow aspects of me sort of gathering pace and picking the right colours, probably I've only been painting really for about 35 minutes. And I'd say, I mean, they're nowhere near done, but that's the first stage of the model done. I've put the apothecary grey on all over the models, except on the sort of stone base, and I've used the contrast Talisar blue on just the sort of weird eyeballs or whatever they are in a rather rapid way. And next up really it's the well, I could do some more spots with this arithmetic blue just to sort of make it look interesting, but let's see what that looks like. Let's splash some of that on one of them just to see if having a slightly different colour maybe in some areas will benefit. I think it will benefit it. It's a much paler colour, and it goes against my rule of don't put the darker colour on first, but yeah, this is much paler. was putting as much as that on, but it does give it, it's a slightly different colour. And I can see there's sort of little nodules and things on there that the speed painter in me is saying, why are you doing this now? But you know, it's using another colour, it's trying it out. It's not really going to slow down the whole progress too much. It's giving it a kind of a gem-like mottled look. Keep that up for the last two, whack that on. Yeah, happy the way it's looking, slightly less bright than the other. I'm not blending it, of course, just sort of spotting it on. Of course, the major prize being that I'm going to go on soon with the ultramarines blue for the main body and leaving the white behind. And it's going to be interesting what that result will be shortly. Numero 4. Again, this isn't really painting, is it? It's just spotting on a colour. You couldn't do anything more easy than this. Although you do have to sort of apply a little bit of care where you locate the spots. It's quick. You can see a bit of a seam line on that one there, which you could tidy up if you were really that fussy. That's one of these things, some of these pre-moulded plastics or slightly rubbery models suffer from, is that they do get some seams. That's it. Marching orders. So yes, just a review again. Contrast Apothecary White splashed over the primer on these with this white primer that was there. You can still see it on the stone bases. And they come pre-primed. They're Dungeons and Dragons face spiders. You can just pop them straight out and start painting on them because the primer is already there. They're taking the contrast paints quite well, and I'm just about to do the most sort of scary section, which is to put a larger amount of this contrast blue on the abdomens, leaving these detail areas around the edge of the abdomen. So I'm going to kind of try and trace it along that line. And I'm worried I'm going to go over the edge because I want to do this with a really big brush, because I don't want to have a lot of streaking on there. So I'm thinking about my brush now, brush stroke, but I think I'm going to go for the flat one or the traditional. I think I'm going to go with a flat brush. And I'm going to start on that abdomen. So here we go, scary time now to see how well it performs on the arse end of this spider, face spider. So I'm going to draw from the front, and of course the other thing is I'll probably want to use a more detailed brush to go in around between the eyes, but for this large space I'm just going to draw it back over, trying not to leave any streaks. Also, now my mind's completely engaged in this, I have completely forgotten to keep it in view of the camera. So this is the concern, this bit here, now that I've already gone on, is it going to smear? So my theory is put the big brush to do that, and then the small brush straight in on the sides to get it into the corners of that abdomen line. And although it's slightly different, discoloured looking, looks a bit like pottery at the moment, it's the kind of slightly uneven look that I'm quite happy with. You know what I just did? You know what I just did that's interesting? I went on with the wrong colour. I went on with the Talisar blue and no one said anything. That's terrible. But I'm not too worried. I'll be able to go back over it with a darker colour. It will be interesting to see it. This is what I wanted to go on with, this darker ultramarines. There was I just about to colour up around the eyes, and I thought, hang on, this looks exactly the same as the last one. So this time I'm not going to use that big flat brush because I think I want a bit more control. And this time it will be the correct colour, the ultramarines, which is quite a strong pigment, and gives me, because I'm using this different brush, a little bit more control into the edges. So it's just a case, look, I end up with a slight streak there. That's slightly better. So now to the small brush. I mean that's another tip really, isn't it? It's a big brush technique if you want to cover that big large space without too many odd little streaks appearing. Apologies if you can't see every detail that I'm doing here on the edge here, but there's a kind of a rippled edge that you can see on the edge of the beneath of the abdomen, and I'm just trying to make sure my blue goes down there. And obviously I can't do that with the big brush, but I've just touched the leg there by accident. So there. And those spots then on the side need to be blue as well. And they are going to be a bit slow and painful to do. They're so tiny. I mean, how far do you go underneath this belly really, because none of it's on show. So you can see it's drying off there. And it's not looking too bad, but I'd experienced this last night where I had, like for example now if I went, oh okay, I'll just now put another bit here, you know, down, oh I've not done that as strong as I'd like. If I went back on there, I will end up with a streak, so it's quite tough on these large areas to use this paint. You can see now I'm putting it between the eyes, the many eyes of the face spider. So yes, in this D&D game where I had face spiders recently and I didn't have any face spider models, which is one of the reasons I picked them up when I saw them, I had some fun with the players. They've got a nasty poison, and that's one thing about the new D&D 5th edition. The poisons are nasty. There's many things in it feel a little bit nerfed in that it's more computer gamey to me as a system now. The fact that you roll 2d20 advantage quite often, which makes rolling and for success relatively easy. Oh, obviously the enemies get it as well for some reasons if they get advantage on you, but it's quite easy to recover from having lots of short rests. So it feels more like a computer game, you know, like Diablo or something, where you sort of bounce into a dungeon and take a rest and you're nearly 100% healed. Although not 100% healed, but you can bounce back more quickly than you used to be able to. I mean, in much earlier versions of D&D anyway. But poisons haven't been nerfed, and in fact they seem to be one of the more sort of dangerous things to get. They feel substantial. And yeah, so you can get quite weak, physically weak creatures that have got a nasty poison or two. You're in trouble if you don't watch out. So that's taken me much longer to do this level now of detail on here. So it's still, you know, doing it quickly as I can. So I'm going to use a big brush again now to whiz down the Ultramarines blue onto the legs, leaving sort of the spot areas that I put on earlier to act as a sort of a step between the full blue and the leg. Even here it is, the Ultramarines is leaving behind some of the, you know, it is a filter rather than completely covering up the colour underneath there, which is good because that's what you want really. You don't want to be painting a leg on here and then, because you're speed painting, you don't want to come back. I don't want to come back and have to do more detail on these claws. I just want to put this colour on and let it do its job. Just make sure I've covered everything though. I can see some over there that I've missed. So yeah, that's reasonable. That's going on well. That's beginning to bring it together more now, isn't it? It's looking a bit less super crappy, rushed, and more like it's on its way to being done, which is quite good considering how quick I am. And I like this bit here. Like I won't go on with another bit of shade on there because the contrast has already given it a nice sort of slightly faint look as it dries. Now the only other thing, let's look at one of my references again. Do I want to do the start of the legs as well like that or not? Let's have a look at my reference photos. It looks like, you know, most people seem to, where's that going? It's a card, I don't know what that is. Anyway, so it looks like, yeah, they've gone for the blue down to the end. this looks like maybe an earlier model from Wizards of the Coast before they made it into a HD version. Let's go back to the search again and find a HD version someone's done. So there's someone done one like a bit like I'm doing there. If anything, they've been a little bit more slapdash, I reckon, with around some of these bits here. But yeah, it doesn't look like anybody's doing the top of the legs. They're leaving them white when they meet the body. And that's an interesting mottled one. That's obviously a 3D one someone's done. That's got cobwebs on it. That's got silver legs. Okay, so back to me and what I'm doing with mine here. It's always good to look at references so you don't get lost on your way. But all those pointy legs are now done. That back abdomen's done. I'm letting this one dry where I put the accidental light blue instead of the ultramarines blue, which I wanted. I'm just going to go back over that once it's dry, but I'll leave that to the side and do all the others first. But that sort of happens, doesn't it, when you're live and you just grab a blue in front of you. So here we go. Hanging on in there to see if I can get these done in a sensible amount of time, maybe 2 hours. So again, it's gone on in that unusual way that looks ever so slightly like watercolour or something, or like you've just put the slip from a, which is the name of the paints you'd sort of put on pottery on, which is not a bad thing when on a beast or a dragon hide or something where you want something to have a slightly uneven look, because if it's one strong colour, you know what I didn't do on the other one, I didn't do the spots underneath here around the other side. Again, because you don't really see underneath unless you're taking a photo of it or something. You're not really going to see these, but you know. You can sort of see them there when they're underneath like that. Do this one properly, do the other side. I mean, yeah, they're quite big beasts as well, aren't they, to paint? I mean, there's a lot to cover, but as I said, if I'm using these contrast paints, they're kind of doing the job for me. And going quite nicely onto the pre-primed model. I'm really getting underneath this one. There's a round circle towards the back and I can't get to it. Not a great blob, but it's gone on. So yeah, now around the eyes with this as well. Again, don't mind too much if I maybe accidentally splash over some of the eye with this darker blue. It's not the end of the world. Speed painting, just trying to get it done. I think I did do, to neaten up, I sort of went along the edge of this spider's. Just to sharpen that up along the front there. I suppose the other unusual thing about this one is that it is a white model, isn't it? It's traditionally quite a hard thing to paint well is to, because just white just doesn't look great, because you shade it with a dark ink or something and it starts to not look like white anymore. Alright, this one now needs its legs. So I use the big brush again. Generously wash down those. I said before, I don't mind if this goes on quite thin, because it leaves some transparency on there to look like it's sort of shaded, which is what you want when you're sort of speed painting. You want to minimise the effort. I'm terrible for just sort of jumping on to the next bit without maybe properly finishing one whole claw. But that's just my sort of magpie nature of sort of flicking in between when I've put one stroke on of paint, skipping on to the next bit. Do I do the pincers in the blue? I think I should. Oh, I'm off the mark there, sorry. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So that's number 2. That's mostly everything done on 2 now. Have a brief pause moment to review where I am. So yeah, it's also worth coming up a little bit higher, isn't it, so you can see the effect I'm going to get on the tabletop in a Dungeons and Dragons game, rather than just closely looking at it. And that's what I'm aiming for. It's like, how quickly can I get these ready to dump on the table in a game? And, you know, whatever it might be. I like a game of Song of Blades and Heroes as well, and Song of Gold and Darkness, is it, the one that's the dungeon version? These would be ideal for that, as well as sort of giant spiders. They don't have to be just face spiders, do they? So yeah, there's my accident where I put the contrast blue, which is the same blue I'd already sort of spotted onto the abdomen on that one by mistake. So I'm going to go back over that with a contrast of the ultramarines. I'm going to do that on that one. I haven't finished that one or its spiny legs yet. I've decided that I'm going to do the end of the pincers in the blue as well, to keep that kind of phase spider blue thing going on. So there we go. So right, next then, let's go back to that one now that's dried, and try and fix it. Get these guys out of the way that they can sort of watch from up there, because they're nearly done. And zoom back in again. So here we go, the important point where I use my big brush again, to try and get the ultramarines over the top of this Talisar blue and just see the result. Is it going to cover it? Will I salvage my error? I have. And then up there into the eyeballs and joining between the... Is it called the thorax? I can't remember my spider anatomy anymore. So that was nice and quick. That's just gone on. And in many ways that went on a lot quicker and better than putting the ultramarines directly onto the body itself by just going over the top of that. And I don't think that's going to look anything different than the others. That's covered it nicely. So yeah, I've fixed that issue there. Now go back to the small brush and start to do the areas around the edge. I think his legs on the side are at a perfect angle to cover up these detailed blobs that I'm doing onto the body. You see any of that going on? You can see it when I move it. Yes, if you've come late to the stream, or you've just skipped forward to this point because you just want to see the paints in action, these are the new Games Workshop contrast paints, and this model is from Dungeons and Dragons ranges. They come pre-primed these days, these particular ones, and because they come pre-primed, I'm trying them out directly on with these contrast paints onto them with no normal paints at all. It's all contrast paint that's gone on here. And as a tip, if you're doing any beasts, furry beasts, dragon scales, spiders, they're all ideal candidates for this sort of technique. If you're speed painting, that is, and you're not worried too much about detail, you just want to get the model done. Because it's one consistent sort of colour. You're not having to dive around a whole range of different colours. Or, for example, if you were doing a metallic, you might want to put something like a sword on a hero. You'd want to paint that metallic before you used any contrast on it. At least I would. I found metal armours. It's good as a wash over a metal armour, but I found at the moment that I used them last night and I very much needed a base of a silver or a gold or a brass on an area that I was doing as a metal before I used the contrast paints on it. But for beasts and such, like furry beasts and things like this with nice detail, even this white one, that Apothecary Grey, has sort of saved the day really here, in that this white model, traditionally quite tricky to do white, by putting the Apothecary Grey all over the legs, it's given that a reasonable shade. You know, it really is when you finish these pincers that it does sort of bring them together. When I say pincers, I mean legs. When you do the claws at the end with the blue, it does bring them together. So we'll do this one's actual pincers. In keeping with everything else that's going on there. And obviously as it dries, it improves. This paint colour does improve. Trying to just make sure I'm consistent around the eyeballs or the egg sacs or whatever they are. I imagine, I don't know face spider anatomy We didn't have them at school, but I get the feeling all these eyes can see into different realms because they can phase in and out of the ethereal back into their own realm. So maybe they've got an eye on everything at one time. So back to the big brush, just to do these claws now. Again, as I say, if I go on there quick and I'm not too heavy, it does result in quite a nice set of what looks like pre-shading happening. In that the white is showing through the transparent paint a bit, which gives you the impression that you've done some shading on there. So while I'm thinking about this, I'm just finishing this bit off, I wonder what colour I should do the base, because the idea being trying to keep to using just these New Games Workshop contrast paints and nothing else in the mix. And I think I've got a plan for the base, and that's that. Well, to start with, I'm probably not going to do anything on the black bit. I'll just leave that and make it look like the rock sort of standing on its own. I'm not going to try and integrate it with the base. I will trim the base, make it clean and black around there. Oh, I could put something in there, some gravel or something. No, I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it as black base and just paint the rock with the contrast colours for speed, otherwise I'll be here forever. And the rock, what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go on with like a palish brown, like the apothecary grey was pale on the original body, so that it gives it some shadow in the rocky areas. But then I'm going to come back and use a darker brown, and then finally probably a black underneath the body. When I say black, they're not called black, these contrast paints have all got their own sort of special names, but a very dark one finally underneath and around the edges. So that's 3 now. There they are. And this one, it's had none of its ultramarines blue on, I shall now dive into. I remember now though, this first one, I didn't do the spotting on the side of its body there, or the claws, so I'm going to do that. Pincers, sorry. In fact, a second coat of this blue on towards the tips. That would be interesting actually, and I'm going to try it. I'm going to try a very dark, one of the black colours again, or maybe this Pterodon turquoise, which is very dark, right on the tips of the claws. Oh look, I missed a bit down there too. This is when you come back and you realise you have missed a few sections. Right, so back to those dots again on the belly. Let me see if I can get it in focus. Sorry for that, I went out of focus for a bit there. This is probably the fastest I've painted anything now for years. I normally take a long time, mostly because I want something to look sort of utterly perfect, but now I'm heading towards 50 rapidly. It's a case of I've been painting since I was about 11, and there's only so many more paint jobs you can do before you're dead basically, so why not do it a bit quicker, as long as you can achieve a sort of quality that you're happy with. good enough to stick on the table. So I wonder if the fact that some of these paints are separating, like I mentioned earlier, from their pigment or from whatever medium they're in, I wonder if that's going to be a problem for them. You can see here it needs a very good shake with an agitator. You know, I'm very happy with them so far. I haven't got an issue, but it's something to keep an eye on, isn't it? Is the shelf life going to be any good, or in 6 months' time will have completely separated out? So there's this large bit again, so a large brush to try and get a consistent sort of single stroke or two down the back before it starts to dry. So again, that's fine by me, that will slowly dry off, and the fact that it's not completely even is fine as well in terms of the final result that I'm after. It's okay. And I'm just spreading it and painting down into those areas where that joins up with the abdomen, joins up with the base of the abdomen. And that's probably one of the hardest bits of this paint job, really, just that edging, and then these dots, just trying to make sure that you don't go too much onto the white, because if you do, and you're a bit slapdash at this point, difficult to recover, because these contrast paints are, you know, you're not going to be able to go back over with a contrast grey over the top of a contrast blue. You're going to have to recover anything where you've made an error with some normal paint to, you know, to properly hide it if I'd really smeared a load of the blue in the wrong place. I will have to come back to it with a solid white or light grey to cover it up. But I haven't really seen any spots that I've done that yet. I've been pretty happy that my brush control is just about under control. And where it's not perfect, I don't care. So at this point, if now I was to try and paint over here in any way while that's drying, it would be a real mess. I did that yesterday. I was doing the side of a 15mm tank, and I thought, I know, I'll try, really just to experiment. I thought while it's drying, I'll get another load on the brush and I'll just paint a bit more on, see if it blends in, and it does not. It just streaks, and it's quite a catastrophic streak, a kind of a smear that doesn't look great. So yeah, my tip is, if you've got a bit drying like that and it's been on there for more than a minute, don't, even though it looks wet, don't try and do anything with it, like trying to run a brush over it with an extra load. Wait until it's dry if you want to correct something, and then come back to it. With these contrast paints, don't try and go on anything like that now, because you will just end up with a weird streak. I'd show you that if I didn't care about finishing these. I wanted these done But I say the previous video I did last night, and I took a 15mm vehicle to see what it was like on large flat surfaces, and it wasn't great, but it could be improved with a bit more skill and interest in it. I was a bit rushed again, and yes, so that's another tip there with these. Don't try this home. Don't try going back over very wet areas with more of the same paint or another to blend it. It just streaks, especially if it's had more than half a minute or so to start to dry. So this is fun because now this is really the last set of legs. Now this is nearly me getting to the base, and I think the base is going to make a huge amount of difference for viewers that are watching this, because while it's this big white snowy Christmas cake underneath this model, it will be distracting from the actual paint job. And once it's toned down and the base has been sort of coloured a dark colour of some kind, which I'm going to build up from light to dark, it should greatly improve the whole look of the whole miniature. I am covering up some of the dotting that I did around the bottom of the legs, and I'm just not too worried about it. I mean, I'm covering some of it, but I've still got enough dots to look like a sort of a graduation of the sort of strange theme between the white and the rest of the model. Like, for example, here I could go all the way in to that joint with this blue, but I'm quite happy to leave sort of a bit of it still white there. Oh yes, if you've joined late and you've missed another comment I made earlier, and that's that I painted onto one of these pre-painted models last night, and was just looking at the model, touching it, having a look afterwards. It was a Paladin model, which I've actually got up here. Another one of these pre-primed models from Dungeons and Dragons, and I just speed painted that as well very quickly with a cloak and things on the back. Now, it's this rubbery kind of model, plus it has its base primer already on, and it dried, and then I held onto it, and I just noticed, literally by just touching the cloak, I was flaking off the contrast paint. So you really need to do a varnish dull coat on these once they're done of some kind, either with a spray or with paint on an acrylic matte varnish, because these models, for some reason, I don't know if it's the same if you use normal paints on them, but these were simply coming off, crumbling off nearly. Not completely a crumble, but you rubbed your finger and it did start to sort of just flake more than I've ever seen another sort of acrylic paint, because they're so thin. I guess they don't have a lot of medium, like acrylic medium, to harden. So you've got a very, very thin coat there that you do need to protect. So yeah, don't expect to throw this onto a table like this, and if you held it for a couple of games, I think because it's flexible as well, these Dungeons and Dragons models, it will just crumble apart. The paint will start to flake off, and it flakes off leaving the primer showing. So you end up with sort of white flaky patches. That's what happened on the cloak, and I had to redo the cloak on that model. Yeah, I'm looking at stuff and thinking, I've done enough now, really, on the actual models. So it has been an hour and a half, and I've got 4 large beasts for Dungeons and Dragons done with these paints. Now, obviously, the benefit that there hasn't been a lot of like metalwork or anything to do on these. They are just, there's no faces or anything. It's just a spider beast. And yeah, that's the Ultramarines blue I've used on there, and this one still, you can see its abdomen's drying. It's covered nicely on the areas I did want to cover. It has, you know, I'm not worried about the fact that it looks a bit mottled. If anything, it looks like a natural skin condition mottling on a spider's butt. So yeah, that's fine. And they look good enough to sort of play with already, but I want to just do the base. So I'm going to use the sort of biggest flat brush I've got. And then the principle that I've said all along through here, you've got to go on with a lighter shade first, because the light going on to a dark colour doesn't sort of work. You need to build up. So I'm going to go with a dark blackish, eventually dark brown for these rocky platforms they're on. But I'm starting with this skeletal horde colour on the principle that it's the lighter shade first, and then I'll build up towards the darker colours. And they will provide more cover, but this will sort of give it a general full coat initially. And you can see what I mean by the fact that a lighter one of these contrast shades does not cover a dark, because you can see there already, if I can get it in focus even, you can see it's not really covering up any of those blue oversplats that I had there. Yeah, and I will be going on with a darker colour on here because I want to get these nearer to black, but I'm starting out with a sort of brownish rock as a foundation on there. So yeah, it's pooled nicely, it's showing a lot of the white through. And that's that, quick. So I'm doing this quick. Don't want to waste any time, just speed it. Yeah, so I was listening, I don't know if anybody likes the Bob Mortimer and Vic Reeves, the two British comedians, but I've always been a sort of fan of them, and I heard Bob Mortimer, who had recently had a heart attack, and then he did this sort of fishing programme on TV, who's a sort of a hero of mine. I think he's quite naturally witty and interesting, and he was talking on a programme in the UK called Desert Island Discs, where on Radio 4 you get to sort of pretend what would you do if you were suddenly deserted on a desert island, what records would you want, what would you read, and also review your life. It's sort of like being in a bit of a psychiatrist chair for half an hour and having an interviewer ask you sort of fundamental questions about your career and family, etc. I mean, one of the interesting things he said was that after he had his heart attack and I think he had surgery, bypass surgery, he went straight to re-listening to a lot of his old records that he loved. And he said, well, basically some of them he thought he hadn't listened to for about 10, 15 years. And he thought, oh my goodness, I could have died and not listened to that song again. I thought both, it was actually a slightly funny thing and also slightly sort of sad, but also on that principle, you know, speed painting miniatures, you know, does allow you to get these done and into a game and in use and have fun, rather than taking ages over these things, because you've only got a certain amount of miniatures you can paint in your life, really. You get to a certain age, that how many more are you going to paint in your lifetime? Yes. So, you know, don't want to get into the depth of the psychology of painting miniatures and models in general, but it's interesting, isn't it? Generally is more of a male thing. I think it's becoming more, you know, females are very interested in it, and that's fantastic. I want to see hobbies like this enjoyed by both sexes, because back in my youth it was very much a male thing, with the odd single interesting alternative female, you might call them, that was interested in gaming, and now it's so much more mainstream. You get it's much more something that both sexes get interested in. I think still, you know, local gaming clubs, like I'm here in Crawley in Sussex, and there is a local Crawley War Games club that I was a member of for about 20 years, and there was only ever one or two wives turned up as a sort of token turn up for a special event. There was never any female in attendance, and that's more of maybe your hardcore wargaming. But Flames of War, and your sort of historical Napoleon's battles. It didn't. It certainly wasn't an event that felt like it would be great for any sort of females to be there. But maybe that's changing too. Maybe some more of the fairer sex are interested in some of the hardcore stuff, not just the sort of fantasy. So yeah, that's gone on there. That made them look like sort of a weird bit of toffee. But yes, that is just the first shade I was going to go on with though for the base. So they look like they're sitting on a bit of toffee, and I want it to be much darker because I want a darker base against the white colouring. It's not looking too bad. I still look like I'm online. I've got a green light, which is great. So anybody that's listened this far in, you must either be desperate or it's a rainy day wherever you are. But oh yeah, that was the other thing I was going to do. I might put some of this Pterodon turquoise on the end of some of the claws and just see if that darkens it. So I'm just going to look what the result of that is while these bases are drying a bit. Yeah, that is nicely darker than the rest of the blue. And since the bases are sort of drying a bit, I'll put a little bit of that on there to sort of darken the tips of the claws. So yeah, this is the Pterodon turquoise. Whoops, I've just touched that bit. That's the problem with these bases that sort of extend off the end. But it does look like it's got a decent leap on it as models go. So I'm going to blast them all with a hairdryer now. So, you know, if you obviously watching me for 1 hour 42 minutes is hard going, especially when I start talking about how little life you've got left to paint your models. But you know, do skip through to bits that you want to see. So here's the me blasting them with a hairdryer, which is a boring bit, so you might want to fast forward. I just want to make sure that the skeleton horde that's on those bases is properly dry before I use a darker shade on top of it to darken it even more. On the principle that you're building up layers. So well, my aim was to try and do these in 2 hours, and it's now been 1 hour 43 minutes. You know, from start to finish. The tabletop standard, really. Oops, just scratched my glasses against the mic, so you may have heard a brief noise. So there we go. Nearly done, and nearly 2 hours in. Need a glass of water. I'm quite pleased with the result. I think we'll need dull coating. As I said before, when I did this Paladin model, the paint started to flake off the cloak, and I wasn't sure if that's because of the nature of it being slightly rubbery. But I think it's probably because these contrast paints are very thin and they don't carry a lot of acrylic bonding kind of agent in it, so it's going to flake if you don't blast it with a coat of dull coat or matte varnish or army shine, whatever the brand you use. And so that skeleton horde has gone on and given the sort of candy bone look to the base they're on, but I want to darken that base further. So I may use this wild wood, looks like a very dark brown, but possibly before that, again, building layers just to see what it's like, I may use the Gulliman Flesh. So that's 1 grade darker. It's good for flesh wash. I've been using this as a sort of a flesh wash. Oh, hi Brandon. Your comment's gone right off the page. Sorry, I'll just bring it on. I might be able to see what's going on. Live re-editing. Here we go. Hi Brandon. They're cool. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, they're face spiders from Dungeons and Dragons, and they're looking okay, I think, for, you know, speed painting. Trying to get 4 models of that size done in 2 hours. So I'm going to go on with this Gulliman Flesh now on the bases that have now been obviously blasted, as you saw a moment ago, by the hairdryer again, which will darken them further. And as I was saying before, the principle was to sort of layer on to slowly darken it in certain areas, so definitely around the edges. Oops, try and get them in focus and show you what I'm doing. It's doing that thing again where I just sort of start to daydream. Yeah, you have to let this dry between. That's why it's handy. I mean, if you can borrow your a hairdryer, or if you're a proficient hairdryer user and a regular, I'd never use a hairdryer personally. I think I did when I was young, you know. I don't know whether I thought it was the right thing to do, but I definitely have used hairdryers before, but not at my age now. I just sort of dry with a towel and straight off. So I had to buy this hairdryer, which is the one I use here to blast the models with. It was just a kid's one. And I got it. It was on Amazon. It was really cheap. I can't remember how much I spent on it. But the reason I liked it is because it said that it wasn't meant to be too noisy for kids, you know, because quite often hairdryers are sold as something that's going to blow your head off because it's so powerful, 1,000 watts of mega blast from the hairdryer. And I thought, if I'm going to use it during videos on YouTube, I don't want something that's going to blow my head off, because it will be too noisy. But obviously the problem is it is still a little bit noisy if I'm blowing and drying these models whilst people are viewing, but I can't do anything about that. If I want to try and not sit here for half an hour to let these dry, you need a hairdryer. So if you are a live streamer and you're doing video work for YouTube or Facebook like I'm doing here, it's definitely worth getting a hairdryer. I know a few friends of mine use them anyway just because they want to speed paint and they don't necessarily want to wait for drying times when they're in the middle of a project. So that's going on much darker than the first coat of skeletal, and this is just showing you really how you can sort of layer up these, because they are they're a filter essentially, that the contrast paint, so they're filtering and they're transparent. So what you can do is build up without having to do any sort of thinning or mixing with mediums or anything, you can just go straight on. But do let the coat before dry, I mean, because I got smears when I didn't do that. And also now, because it's getting slightly darker, it's beginning to hide some of the darker blue that's gone on. I'm not covering everywhere when I'm doing this. I'm sort of leaving some spots with the lighter skeletal horde colour on there. And I'm going to then, next level is I'll darken this up even more once that's dried off. Looks like I'm making a kind of a buttery biscuit base here at the moment until I add more of a black tone into it. I mean, and you can't really go wrong with this. It's not like you're painting on a thick chalky paint that's going to mess up the base. Right. So how have those bases improved from the last time round? Yeah, it's still looking very shiny, so let's hit them with the hairdryer again. Sorry, rather boring bit, but please skip through. We'll get to some really exciting bits soon. So that's an interesting colour. So that's the Gulliman flesh that I've put on there, and that's gone on like a gravy, a rich Sunday dinner gravy, basically. So yeah, that's a good gravy, that stuff. So I'd definitely be using that one a lot on flesh and things. But that has darkened, as you can see, my mottled stonework, which has been washed there. And now I'm going to use this wild wood. So even darker again. I'm going to put that around the edges to sort of darken the edges of these bases. But some of them I've seen aren't completely dry there yet. But let's see how I go on with that rather than wasting any more time. I did go on a bit heavy with that Gulliman actually, but you can see this is even darker, and actually I can see it smearing, so I should let that dry. And that's not delivering me a good experience, unfortunately, because it's smearing somewhat on there. I'm getting a kind of a bad edge up there. I wonder if I can recover that with just by a bit of water on there. Yeah, it's left a sort of very slight tide mark, but I've recovered that through a bit of smearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my airbrush station to get ready to turn it on, so I can hit these with a to completely be finished on these with a primer, not a primer, even a dull coat. With this tester's dull coat, I could spray them and get that done. So just a moment. Yes, So you may have just heard the beep of the GoPro crash going on, and let's see if I can switch the GoPro if it is on. Yeah, so that's the airbrush booth. Unfortunately, I can see it, and I will cut over to that in a moment now that I've got it on, ready to put the primer on. Yeah, I recently had to move around in the room and stuck my airbrush booth around the other side of it because it was beside me, but I was so crowded out with everything while I was doing the streaming that it was better to give myself a bit more room and put the airbrush sort of behind me. So I can point that out actually if I go back to the main view of me. Yeah, so back over there. That's the airbrush booth over the back there, and yeah, I'll just put it there to give myself a bit more room. Plus, it can exhaust itself out into the atmosphere, damaging the ozone layer by the exhaust going out the window, not into my lungs. But hopefully, since it's a small amount of paint and it's not got an aerosol. Although, hang on a minute, this is an aerosol. But anyway, yes. So yeah, I spray it out there, and the air booth's over that way. So yeah, how's things going? It's getting there. I want these to dry a bit more before I put a darker shade on these bases. And I'm in two minds about it. I might go over a lot stronger with a darker colour to cover up now some of the lighter patches, because it is kind of looking a bit like a toffee, like a chunk of toffee underneath. It's not very rock-like. It might be, if anything, I may be scuppered here in that I was going to try and finish these with just the contrast paints, but I think I probably need to put some dry brush on the edge of the rock with a like a sand or a colour like this Jackbone from Privateer Press, because it's not giving it a nice sharp edge on the rock, and I would like to see that. So I may well do that. Maybe the one thing I do is just a little edge dry brush on the rock base. Otherwise it's not going to look very rocky, it's going to look a bit like candy. But yeah, I'm going to hit that again now with the hairdryer. And well, hopefully you can still hear me, but it's quite noisy. As I blast them to try and get that base colour really dry. I mean, that's really as a general tip, is to, with these contrast colours, make sure they're completely dry, really. At least that's my view at the moment. I should think maybe if you mix them with a mixing medium or something, a mixing medium might allow you to work with them a bit longer before they dry. A retardant. So yeah, I think that's properly dry now. I'm ready for this wild wood colour, and I shall switch back down to it. Yes, that very dark wild wood. And I'm going to use this thinnish brush. I'm going to wet it up a bit first, so the brush is a little bit moist. Zoom in. You see that's very, very dark. It's almost like a tar along the edge. But it can work, it can work. It's going on less like a wash. Oh, it's working out there. Yeah, I'm quite pleased. It's not completely obscuring all detail. And this is experimentation with these things, so it's interesting to see how it pans out. I am going to smear it over the whole lot though, to sort of darken some of the previous areas. But not every area. Yeah, it's okay. It's like a dark rock, doesn't it? I will dry brush it. I am going to dry brush it. I can't resist not sticking a dry brush on there once it's dry to bring it all together. And also I don't mind if I catch the end of their sort of toes and feet, because it just sort of darkens those out too. In fact, it's drying off nicely on the other one actually, probably because these things are hot currently, because they've been hit by the hair dry so much. Yeah, that's suitably darkened, and that's quite a good example of layering these really, that you can keep painting them over the top of each other because they're quite transparent. They're quite sort of forgiving. I'm not suddenly, I wasn't completely happy with the finish of this wildwood being quite dark, but the result is okay. Nearly okay enough to say that I won't dry brush, and then I would have done the entire thing with only contrast paints, but I do think I will dry brush the edge of the rocky patches. Oh, if anything, that needed something underneath the abdomen. That one's done. One more base. Oh, unfortunately, I'm 2 minutes over my 2 hour. I was going to try and do these in 2 hours, 4 models in 2 hours, but with these new contrast paints, but didn't quite make it. I'm trying to avoid it looking like there's a load of smeary brush strokes on there. Yeah, so nearly ready for the table, really. I mean, the benefit being, as mentioned before, face spiders or beasts of any kind, it's easy to do colour schemes on them because you're not having to be too worried about lots of tiny details like faces and things. So with large bodies like this, even though they're big, you're getting reasonably good coverage. I use that contrast Marines blue on the abdomen. Now I could add some more turquoise, the darker colour again, around different areas of the abdomen to sort of brighten up, but I think the overall scheme's fine. I'm still in these two minds whether should I Should I bother dry brushing on the rock? I think I will, with a sort of medium gun corpse brown. So I'm breaking the whole, everything else done with these contrast colours, but I will, because that's a medium sort of brown, I will do a very faint dry brush, see how that works out. I really should let them dry first though. But I can see a couple of them looking quite dry. Just to see how a dry brush looks on the contrast paint. They haven't got greatly sharp edges, these, but yeah, that is slightly defining the edge a bit better than what's there with a dry brush. And the dry brush going on very nicely on that. See, I'm getting a bit of an edge to the rock. Which was lost when that last witch wood, is it? The dark brown went on. This is nicely picking out some of the definition in a kind of quick and dirty way. Just before I hit them with a hairdryer for the last time, and then a dull coat to seal this kind of quite thin paint, which this is one of the things I saw with the contrast paint on one of these pre-painted models last night when using it, as it started to crumble off. The paint used to start to crumble off the cloak that I'd done using the red. Went on a bit stronger there with the dry brush where I'd seen that I'd created a bit too much of an edge between the two shades of colour. Just sort of blend them together with a dry, quick and dirty dry brush. That's two nearly done. That's two nearly done. Yeah, these did need a dry brush just to sharpen the edges, otherwise they were looking just like a blob. So you can't. So I can't claim that I've completely did these without any other paints than just the contrast paints, the new ones, because yeah, I've gone on with a dry brush in the end of a traditional Privateer Press P3 paint, just to define the edges of some of the rocky formations. So, but I wanted to keep the base relatively dark to let the model sort of pop on top of it anyway. Oops. And this sort of choice of brown on top of the contrast paints that I've put on this base is quite forgiving, so I can be quite generous with my dry brushing. It's also giving the whole thing a bit of time to sort of dry off too. They're done, okay. Apart from a dull coat, which is important, and I think it will actually pull the whole thing together with a quick dull coat. And I'm going to blast them now with my extractor fan on. So two things are going to happen. One, I'm going to put the other mic on, which so it's going to get noisy when that goes on, and also the airbrush extractor turns on. Alright, so the other mic's on, so you probably hear a slight echo from me now. And I'm going to go over there with these models and blast them, and I'm going to put them on a small piece of wood, I think, or a large piece of wood. Medium piece of wood. So, madam, how do you like your spiders? I will blast them again actually with the hairdryer just before I go over there. Because there's still some areas that are a little bit moist around the edges. So yeah, I'm going to dull coat them, like I dull coated this little model, which again was just a speed paint of one of these Dungeons and Dragons female paladin dwarf model. And so last night I started to touch this cloak about an hour after it had dried, and I'd used the contrast Flesh Tearers Red on there. I think that was the one. Or was it the blood? No, it was Flesh Tearers Red, which has gone on well. No extra painting or dry brush or anything. It's just gone straight into the crevices on there, folds, and but it started to rub off with by touching, really gentle touching. That's why I noticed it, because normally I'm not one to sort of handle a model too much. So yes, if you're using the contrasts, make sure you dull coat them. And I've always used Tester's spray lacquer. I'm just going to whack my extractor fan on and switch over to that video. So, camera. Wrong one. There we go. So, I'm going to whack them, and I should be transferring over to the other mic. So, here I go. Now, touching the other mic, it's probably a wee bit noisy. It's going to get really noisy now because I'm about to stick on the extractor fan, so apologies for that. So there we are with the testers. Extractor fan coming on, powering up. See, while they're sitting there like that, they will, the air being extracted over to them, and it kind of helps with the drying, a bit like doing the hair drying on them. Also, I want the extractor still to be on to suck away some of the the fumes that come off these. If I lift up this mic, I can even talk without bending over like a hobbit. Yes, so yeah, this is just a piece of MDF I've had cut, and I like to use, they tend to warp, MDF warps. So any opportunity I have while I'm dull coating something and there's overspray, I'll use it on there and just let it overspray onto the MDF, which is slowly sealing it away. Because I often do bases and things with these, which I'm going to use and texture up, making sure it's all sealed up is good. I can see these models are now slowly losing that gloss because it is a dull coat from testers. So it's a lacquer, but it will go absolutely matte, and it's one of the best I've used, although there's nice other ones from Army Painter, etc. I have just seen one issue, and that's that I've left some blits of colour on the basing, and I will want to deal with that. So I'll probably blacken those bits off. I'm not going to do that now because, as far as I'm concerned, they're finished for now. But yeah, they're slowly going more and more matte, and I shall turn off this mic and disappear back over to the other station. You can probably still hear some noise coming from the other side of the room because I've left that on. Let's cut back to the wrong picture. Hey, it's me. Get back onto my seat. Right, so I'm done. I'm done with these. 2.5 hours nearly, and I'm now sorted. So I can bring back on the other. No, wrong one.